Hi guys, I guess we back for part number three. Part number three, it's to come back to it. It's what? Yes, early independence and challenges from 1804 to 1849. Okay, so just to recap what we've been discussing on part number two. On part number two, we've seen the different events that led to the fight for anti-slavery from 1791 to turn into a war of independence in Haiti due to France, intentions to reinstall slavery in the different colonies, including Saint-Domingue. So as a result, a real war took place between France and the Haitian Revolutionary Army that resulted in a defeat, an humiliating defeat for France. On this occasion, we've seen the rise and fall of Toussaint Louverture. We've seen also great personalities like Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Henri Christophe. But we've seen also at the end that there was an attempt and a realization of France to congregate an international coalition to isolate Haiti and to force them as well to pay a reparation indemnity to France due to the losses about products, infrastructure, and also slaves. So this is where we are. So now we are, but in 1804, Haiti's independence was declared with a constitution. And now we entering into the early phase of the independence. Okay, so to share my screen, let me show what we're going to talk about. So what we'll be talking about will be the economic and political instability, the political struggles, and the autocratic movement that was taking place in Haiti, the international isolation and debt, and we'll look into the geopolitical aspects as well as the economical aspects related to the international isolation and the reasons that were taking place to justify it. Okay, now before we get into the economic instability, I just want to put a small intro about it. It is always difficult for any revolution to move from a state of oppression, like slavery or social oppression, to evolve quickly towards a democratic system. And simply because that transition is difficult, because you need to change your mind, you need to change your perspective. And generally speaking, people have difficulties to adapt to this really rapid transition while they were under a different system of oppression for hundreds of years. And that was the case not for the American Revolution, but that was the case for the slaves in Saint-Domingue turning into Haiti. But that was the case as well for the French. This is why the French were having extreme difficulties to move towards democracy. And just because they were not prepared for that, they were not ready, or the mindset was not ready. And the same for the Haitian Revolution. You can see the same issue as human beings living from a state of oppression to be free, guided individuals. And this is really difficult. So this is why you will understand why this instability. So first of all, the economic instability that plagued Haiti following the revolution had profound implications for both its political evolution, its ability to counter international isolation. Dependency on agriculture. Haiti's economy remained heavily reliant on agriculture, particularly sugar production, which was already the thing that was making Saint-Domingue unique. The loss of the lucrative sugar trade, coupled with the devastation of the revolution, led to a sharp decline in revenue. It's true that the old infrastructure were, were demolished, devastated. All the fields, the crops, and everything was burnt to the ground. So naturally, they didn't have a way to restart the economy. This is why Toussaint Louverture was a real visionary, because he wanted to maintain the structure in place and continue with this economy. But unfortunately, it didn't go as he planned. This economic downturn made it difficult for the government to provide the basic services and invest into infrastructure, and the debt burden. So naturally, the country's debt to France, the 112 millions that were, forced onto Haiti, incurred during the colonial period, was a constant drain on its resources. This debt burden made it difficult for Haiti to attract foreign investment and obtain loans, further hindering its economic development. Political instability. The two goes hand in hand. You can't have economic stability if you have political instability, and the same and vice versa. So the economic unstable situations contributed naturally to political instability and the rise for autocratic leaders. The struggle for power among various factions, combined with the country's limited resources, made it difficult to establish a stable and effective government. This political instability, in turn, hindered Haiti's ability to address its economic challenges, to improve the lives of its citizens. But naturally, because if you have different kind of views, different kind of priorities, how can you align the complete nation into a direction? If you have multiple heads, at least if the heads find a consensus, find a way forward, then in that case, you have a solution. But if you have different heads, different mindset, then you can't reach a consensus, none whatsoever. Impact on international isolation. Both the economic and political instability made it difficult for Haiti to counter international isolation, because people come to the door. They want to trade. They want to work with Haitis because they realize that the sugar plantations or the sugar production could be a viable asset. But now they realize these people can't work together. So it's not possible to find a resolution. The country's weak economy and lack of political stability made it unattractive for foreign investors and diplomats to find a way forward with Haiti at this time. This isolation further limited Haiti's ability to secure economic assistance and diplomatic recognition, because naturally, if you want to have a stable relationship with other empires or nations, you need to have a stable view of how to secure this alliance, how to make it work, and how to install some kind of a reciprocal kind of a collaboration or trade. In conclusion, we can just say that the economic and political instability that characterized Haiti's early years of independence had a significant impact on both its political evolution and its ability to counter international isolation. The country's economic challenges and political instability made it vulnerable to exploitation and hindered its development. Why? Because you put in competition the two sides. If you have a north and south sides, all you have to do is to put them in competition, or to find the way that they can't refuse any offer that you can make them. And they will take them because they don't have any choice. They don't have any leverage to negotiate because they have nothing, because they can't make their mind altogether. Now, political struggles and despotism in early Haiti. The early years of Haitian independence were characterized by political instability and the rise of autocratic, leaders. These leaders sought to consolidate power and modernize the country, yes, but they're often conflicting. They had often conflicting policies and personal ambitions hindering Haiti's development. We can name, for example, Henri Christophe in a northern kingdom. Henri Christophe ruled the northern part of Haiti from 1807 to 1820, established a monarchy and declared himself King Henry I. He implemented a series of ambitious projects, including the construction of the citadel La Ferrière, a massive mountaintop fortress. However, Christophe's rule was also marked by his brutality and repression. He used fear and intimidation to maintain control, and his regime was characterized by forced labor and harsh punishments. So you see, when you have a king, you establish a king and a monarchy. A monarchy comes with an aristocracy and some kind of a ruler on top, and the ruler on top treat people like his subjects. There's no more democracy. Democracy is gone at this moment of time when you're saying, I'm a king. Alexandre Pétion and the Southern Republic. Alexandre Pétion, who governed the southern part of Haiti from 1807 to 1818, established a republic. Unlike Christophe, Pétion was more tolerant and democratic. He encouraged education and economic development, but his administration was also plagued with financial difficulties and political infighting. And once again, there's no clear directions on where to go. Because if you have political infighting, it's because people are fighting internally to influence or to gain control of some elements that is making Alexandre Pétion republic to work. Now, internal conflict and instability, the rivalry between Christophe and Pétion led to a series of conflict between the North and the South. While they occasionally cooperated, the competing interests and ambitions often undermined Haiti's unity and stability. Once again, it's the same thing. You can't collaborate with your neighbor. It will end up into no possibilities of development. The instability hindered the country's ability to recover from the devastation of the revolution and develop a strong and prosperous nation. Autocratic rule and repression. Both Christophe and Pétion, despite the differences, were authoritarian leaders who relied on force and intimidation to maintain control. The regimes were characterized by limited political freedom, censorship, and harsh punishment for dissent. These autocratic view stifled the development of democratic institutions and hindered Haiti's progress towards a more just and equitable society. What I personally call the kind of republic that Alexandre Pétion had in place was more dictatorship. It was a dictatorship with some possibility of for some people around him to give him advices, but in reality it was a dictatorship. Now, let's talk about international isolation and debt. So we need to appreciate where it's coming from. So Haiti's independence was not universally recognized by an international community, as you can imagine. Many European nations, particularly France, Great Britain, but particularly France, continue to view Haiti as a rebellious colony and imposed sanctions on the country. Yes, indeed. Because if you want to justify the sanctions and saying there's a status quo, there's the British Empire, the Spanish Empire, the French Empire, United States, then in that case, you have a status quo. But you can't change that. And if you want to maintain status quo, you need to control the element that is rebellious. And the element that is rebellious was Haiti. And Haiti is still treated internationally on the geopolitical, landscape, it's still a colony. So therefore, there will be sanctioned accordingly. This isolation made it difficult for Haiti to establish diplomatic relations and secure economic assistance because they are still a colony, not an independent state, even though they claim themselves that they are independent. Indeed, the international isolation and debt imposed on Haiti after the revolution were largely attempts to punish the country for its successful slave rebellion and revolution, and to prevent the spread of revolutionary ideas to other colonies. Because once again, you need to understand something. The vision of equality, liberty, free will, it doesn't include the vision for blacks, Native Americans, Indians, people in India. It doesn't include them. It doesn't include the blacks, us. It excludes them. It's only possible for the white people. The American colonies were European colonists. So the people that were there were white. They were coming from Europe. They were the same as the French, the the people from Netherlands, Germany, England. They were Irish, Scottish, but they were all white. Therefore, they wanted to rebel and to become independent. It was accepted. They were fighting for it. They fought. They won. They got it. But they were white. They were not black. Black are not humans. Once again, in the concept of that time, for the white people, black are not humans. They are not equal to white people. Therefore, we can't allow them to spread the view of revolutionary ideas because they are not white. The European powers, particularly France, were deeply concerned about the implications of the Haitian Revolution. They fear that it will inspire similar uprisings amongst enslaved population in other colonies, because the French Empire is a set of colonies. The British Empire is a set of colonies. The Spanish Empire is a set of colonies. Then, to avoid or to discourage such rebellions, they sought to isolate Haiti and make it a cautionary tale. The economic sanctions. European nations imposed economic sanctions on Haiti, limiting trade and investment. This made it difficult for Haiti to rebuild its economy and develop its infrastructure. Debt burden. Haiti was forced to pay a substantial indemnity to France as compensation for the property lost, property being buildings, infrastructure, products, but also slaves, as I said before. And this was lost by white colonists because this was the way they were making themselves extremely rich and wealthy through slavery. This debt burden was an heavy financial burden on the country, hindering its economic growth and development. Diplomatic isolation. Haiti was largely isolated from the international community, making it difficult to establish diplomatic relations and secure foreign aid, even for whatever aid. If you wanted any medicines or whatever, you couldn't get it. If you wanted equipment, you couldn't get it. It was extremely difficult. This isolation further weakened the country's position and made it vulnerable to exploitation because you have nothing. All you can do is accept what they propose you. That's it. You are not in a position to negotiate. By imposing these harsh conditions, the European powers hoped to punish Haiti for its rebellion and discourage other enslaved population, as I said, for following suit. So, however, their efforts were ultimately unsuccessful because in reality, they wanted to make Haiti's beg to come back as a colony for France. But they endured it, and Haiti's independence stayed. And its example inspired freedom movements around the world. Because in reality, for any Black people, such as me as a Cameroonian, when the way I'm looking at Haiti, it's really the reference of the first, you know, free black country outside of Africa. And to me, this is a real reference. Okay. Now, it's important to remind something. Now, I'm gonna get into some economical kind of aspects related to the relationship of why USA turned its back on Haiti. We have to understand it because to remember you what we said during the part number two, I was mentioning that Toussaint Louverture was having secret relations, secret negotiations with the United States and the Spanish to start trade. And they were trading. We know they were trading. But in reality, there's something else behind it. So let me explain. Finally, it is important in that view to remind ourselves that President Thomas Jefferson was clearly opposed to any rebellion of a successful revolution of Saint-Domingue, now Haiti. As for his announcement in 19th of July, 1801, for several factors. First of all, in 2010, the Congressional Research Service assessment on the costs of major US wars estimated that the revolutionary cost was about 2.4 billion in 2011. It's a lot of money. Now, the cost for the French, because the French were the nation that was heavily supporting the American colonies for the War of Independence throughout the complete set of events, because there was a revenge for the 7 Years' War that was taking place in Canada. So the US War of Independence cost to the French about 1.3 billion livres, around 11.3 billion today, in loans and supplies to the Americans, plus massive extra cost to equip and dispatch the French army and naval capabilities to America, but also to assault British strongholds around the world. Because in order to keep the British occupied and to leave the Americans to fight their fights and to win the War of Independence, they needed the French to help them, to support them. So the cost was massive, around 11 billion of dollars today. Okay. But it had to be combined with the 3.3 billion livres France owed for the 7 Years' War in Canada. The economic upheaval led to the French Revolution because of the series of events with the Estates General, the National Assembly creation, the opposition to the authority of the King, Louis XVI, and then they overthrew the monarchy and the aristocracy, leading to the death of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Okay, you've seen the American and French Revolution comparative analysis. If you didn't, have a look. Now, what it says as well is that the American military spending totaled 160 million in 1783. So in combination of everything they owed to the French, massive level of money that they owed to the French. If you convert the 160 million of in 1783 to today's currency, with 200 year old currencies, and then trying to make a comparison, the amount will be worth today 3.1 billion today. Okay, so around 4 billion plus 11 billion, that's 15 billions almost. So now the story says James One, an American banker, a visionary man, who privately assumed French debts at a higher interest rate, helped the US clear its debt with the French government in 1795, in 12 years, with an economy that is only starting. Fantastic. I don't believe that for a second. Now Swan profited by reselling these debts into the US market. So they're launching a market. They're launching the stock market in reality. So the US no longer owed foreign government money, but it still owed private investors in US and in Europe. Who is launching a new bank and a new market? France, with the Bank of France, Napoleon. So you can naturally see that these numbers show that France valued and see and I've seen the American Revolution as a long-term investment, not as a short-term, the long-term investment, so that they can control the USA for a certain time. USA opposes Haitian independence, despite France was selling Louisiana to the USA in 1803 for 15 million. The estimate of Louisiana at the time was almost 100 million. They sold that to 15 million, which US credit bought from American capital markets with low interest loans. But the money was you can imagine that the money was used for to fuel the IT's the Haitian war against the revolution, the the revolutionaries. Okay, so with that sequence, I wanted to create a direct link between the sale of Louisiana to the US and the US failure to recognize Haiti's independence. Here is the breakdown. Okay. First of all, shared interest in suppressing a revolution. Both France and the United States had a strong interest in suppressing the Haitian revolution and preventing it from inspiring similar uprisings in other colonies. But not only the colonies, the southern states of USA that were taking advantage of slavery. The sale of Louisiana to the United States was a strategic move by France to consolidate its power in Europe and raise funds to counter the ongoing conflict in Haiti. Yes, they needed cash because the Napoleonic Wars in Europe were costing France a fortune. And Haitis at the moment were beating them so severely, they wanted to get rid of it. They wanted to this war, this rebellion to be crushed. But they needed cash in order to do it. And that was the money that they were asking for the Louisiana sale. The fear of contagion. United States, like any other European powers, feared that recognizing Haitian independence would embolden enslaved populations in its own territories, particularly in the south of the US, where they were largely benefiting from slavery. And the economy was fundamentally based on slavery. You were cutting the slavery now, it will be over. No economy whatsoever. Because they needed to have this free labor in order to create this movement of economy and to be competitive in terms of price. The US government believed that recognizing Haiti would be seen as an endorsement of rebellion and could lead to instability within its own borders. So, no freaking way. Economic interest. The United States also had economic interest in the Caribbean region. Recognizing Haiti's independence could have jeopardized US trade and access to markets in the region. Because Spanish trade and Spanish Empire was extremely present in the Caribbean. So diplomatic consideration. Recognizing Haiti's independence will have been a significant departure for the prevailing diplomatic norms of the time, which favored the maintenance of colonial empires. You understand what it means? It means this. You have the French Empire, you have the British Empire, you have the Spanish Empire, and you have the United States. The United States at this moment was a baby, was not strong enough to impose on its view. Maybe they would have recognized Haiti because that was good, because they were revolutionary brothers. They fought the French. They They beat the French severely, by the way. But they recognize we need to trade with the British. We need to trade with the French. We need to trade with the with the Spanish. If they are all against Haiti and we go against them, where do we stand? We don't have any footing there. So in order to keep the status quo, and the same for the French, for the British, the same for the Spanish, the goal was to keep the status quo. Let's leave it as it is. We don't want to disrupt it. If we allow Haiti to become an independent country, then in that case, it will challenge the established order and risk alienating other European powers. So as you can see, the sale of Louisiana to the United States and the US failure to recognize Haiti's independence were closely linked by a shared desire to suppress not only the Haitian Revolution, but to maintain the status quo around the world. And Haiti was a real issue, at the time on the geopolitical stage, but also on the economic stage. What do? We need their resources, but we can't allow them to exist, because if they exist, they will create a precedent. So, and largely, there's also something else. Forget the great ideals of liberty and free will when it's about Black individuals. For the whites, Blacks were not humans. Did you see any uprisings from the Native Americans? Yes, they fought. What happened to them? They were slaughtered. They're targeting who? Not they were targeting the fighters, but they were targeting who? Women and children. That's it. So for them, if there was a precedent, it would be dangerous. The world that we see today will not be existing, and just because of IT. So IT was too dangerous to exist, so it had to be crushed, like in its crib. It's like a baby. Instead of letting it grow to become an adult and ready to fight, it's better to crush it now to avoid it to become something like a much larger issue in the future. And the much larger issue would have been, to create little IT in different part of the world. And that was too dangerous. And that was the reason why, of all this, the isolation, the pushing for the political instability and economic instability. Thanks very much for your time, and I'll see you in part number 4. Thanks.